What if the most harrowing tragedy in American history wasn't about survival, but a secret so dark it was designed to control us all, and it's still working today? This isn't just a story of the past. This is personal. This is my family's story. And what I discovered changes everything. It started with a diary, passed down like a rumor, whispered about but never believed. Until I held it in my hands, a relic that felt heavier than its physical weight, as if it carried the burden of centuries. The leather cover was cracked, its surface etched with the kind of scars only time and desperation could leave behind. It smelled of damp earth, of age, of secrets buried far too long. I didn't open it at first. Something about it felt wrong, like it was waiting for me, daring me to look inside. And when I finally did, the first word I saw stopped me cold. Run. Just one word, written in hurried strokes. The ink bled into the page as if the writer's hand had trembled. I told myself it was nothing, an instinctual reaction of a desperate soul. But that wasn't the only thing waiting for me inside. As I flipped through its brittle pages, I noticed more. Dates scratched out and rewritten. Symbols I couldn't begin to understand, phrases that seemed almost alive. And then, on a page stained and worn, I saw a name. My name. I froze. My heartbeat echoed louder than my thoughts, the room around me suddenly too quiet. This diary, lost to time, buried for decades, somehow knew who I was, but how and why? The answer, I feared, wasn't just in the diary. It was in the bloodline I never asked to inherit. This wasn't a record of history. This was a warning meant for me, for us all. What I found in the following pages, and the journey it set me on, would unravel everything we thought we knew about the Donner Party. Because their story isn't just about survival. It's about deception, manipulation, and a shadow that still stretches into our present, quietly shaping what we see, what we trust, and what we believe. The past isn't done with us, and as I stand here now, I'm not sure we're ready. When the light touched the diary's surface, the ink began to shimmer, revealing secrets the past had fought to keep buried. I froze, my eyes locked on the glowing script as if it might vanish if I blinked. The ink didn't just shimmer, it pulsed, alive with an urgency that seemed to transcend time. It was as though the words themselves were clawing their way through history, demanding to be seen. And then I read them. Trust no one. The phrase hung in the air, stark and unrelenting. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a warning. And as I flipped the pages, I realized it was only the beginning. In the margins, symbols began to appear, some faint, others etched deep, almost angrily, into the fragile paper. They were intricate, overlapping patterns, resembling celestial charts or coded maps. At first, they felt random, like the scattered thoughts of someone losing their grip on reality. But the longer I stared, the more I saw. These weren't ramblings. They were coordinates. I reached for my phone, pulling up a map to cross-reference the symbols. But as I did, I noticed something else. The dates. They were scratched out in some places, rewritten in others, the ink darker and heavier than the rest of the text. Whoever had written this diary wasn't just recording events, they were rewriting them, manipulating them, twisting time itself into a story that wasn't meant to be understood, at least not easily. Each piece felt like part of a puzzle, but the picture it formed was maddeningly incomplete. Every word, every symbol, every altered date whispered of something larger, something calculated. But to what end? The air in the room seemed to shift, growing dense, suffocating. My chest tightened as the shadows stretched and deepened around me. They flickered like flames, dancing across the walls, as if the room itself had become a living entity, watching me, warning me. The scent of damp wood and old paper filled my lungs, mingling with something metallic, sharp and unsettling. My instincts screamed to leave, to step away, but I couldn't. And then I saw it. The desk where the diary had rested, its surface scarred and worn with the passage of time. At first, the marks seemed random, the natural wear of history, but one stood out. Deep, jagged letters carved with deliberate force, as though by someone who knew they might not live to see the message received. Turn back. My heart thundered in my chest. Turn back from what? What had this person seen? What had they experienced that left them so desperate to leave this plea etched into the wood? My hands shook as I ran my fingers over the carving, the edges rough and splintered beneath my touch. But turning back wasn't an option. Not anymore. Whatever this diary held, Whatever horrors or truths it contained, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a message, alive and pulsing, reaching out across centuries. What kind of secret is so devastating, so forbidden, that my great-great-grandmother buried it in time itself for generations, waiting for me and only me to uncover its truth? Why me, and why now? These questions wouldn't leave me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts as I pushed deeper into the mystery. The diary wasn't just a record. It was a breadcrumb trail leading me to places I never imagined. Each page pointed somewhere new, somewhere darker, and then I found myself standing in the forest. The air was heavy here, still and suffocating, as if the trees were holding their breath. Each step crunched brittle leaves beneath my feet, the sound sharp and hollow, like treading on the forgotten bones of the past. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind through the branches. And then I saw it, a tree, older and more massive than the others, its bark gnarled and scarred by time. But it wasn't the tree itself that caught my attention. It was what was carved into it. I moved closer, brushing away moss and dirt to reveal deep, deliberate letters etched into the trunk. They weren't random. They spelled a name. My family name. It felt impossible. The carving was ancient, the edges worn smooth by decades of weather, but it was unmistakably mine. My fingers traced the grooves, and for a moment the world around me seemed to tilt. What was this place? And why did it feel like it had been waiting for me? The answers weren't just in the forest. They were in the diary, and one discovery led to another. Tucked between its fragile pages, I found a supply list. It looked ordinary at first, flour, beans, tools, but something was off. The numbers didn't add up. Items were missing, quantities altered. It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. Someone had sabotaged the supplies. But why? As I studied the list, I noticed a faint outline in the corner, a smudged impression, barely visible. It was the shape of a handprint, smaller than mine, pressed into the paper like a ghostly signature. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't random. Someone else had touched this diary, someone who had left their mark without realizing it. And then there were the graves. I stumbled upon them deeper in the forest, hidden beneath a canopy of twisting branches. There were no headstones, no markers, just mounds of earth that time had almost reclaimed. I counted 7. Most were unmarked, except for one. It bore a symbol I recognized immediately, the same jagged circle I had seen in the margins of the diary, the same lines that seemed to intersect at impossible angles. My chest tightened as I knelt beside it, brushing away leaves and dirt. The air felt colder here, heavier, and then I saw the plank of wood, partially buried but unmistakable. I pulled it free, revealing a name carved into its surface. The letters were crude but clear, and they formed a name that stopped me cold. My name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but there was no logic to this. This grave wasn't ancient, it wasn't forgotten. It had been left here deliberately, with my name carved into it as though it had been waiting for me all along. Each clue felt like pulling a thread, unraveling a tapestry of lies and secrets. But the more I uncovered, the more the fabric of history itself began to tear apart. This wasn't just about the past, it was about me. About something buried so deep, so devastating, that it had been waiting for generations to surface. And whatever it was, I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. The Donner Party didn't just carve a trail through the mountains. They left behind a shadow that refuses to fade, reaching through time to pull us into its darkness. The deeper I followed the trail, the less it felt like I was moving forward. Every step brought a strange sensation, as though the path beneath my feet was alive, shifting, pulling me back towards something it desperately wanted me to see. And then, as if the shadow of the past was forcing its way into the present, my equipment began to fail. The first failure was my compass. I stared at it in disbelief as the needle spun erratically, refusing to settle on a direction. I tapped it, shook it, even held it close to my ear as if I might hear some mechanical explanation, but there was none. The path stretched out in front of me, winding and narrowing into the thickening fog, but now I had no way of knowing where I was, or if I'd ever been here before. And then my flashlight flickered. Once, twice. Then it went out entirely, leaving me standing in the growing darkness. The trees loomed closer in the shadows, their gnarled branches stretching toward me like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, sharper, and with every breath I exhaled, a mist hung in the air before disappearing into the fog. I felt the cold before I saw the carving. The bark of the tree was scarred, fresh shavings of wood scattered at its base. Someone had been here, someone who'd left a message carved into its surface. My heart raced as I stepped closer, running my fingers over the grooves. The lines were deliberate, precise, as though the person carving them had taken great care with every stroke. A date, recent, too recent. I stared at it, my mind spinning. This was no relic of the past. Someone had been here, retracing the same trail I now walked. But why? And who? The diary had been silent about others, yet here was proof that I wasn't the first to seek its secrets. The temperature dropped again, a biting chill that seeped through my jacket. It wasn't just cold. It felt alive, like an unseen presence brushing against my skin. My breath caught in my throat as the fog began to roll in, thick and relentless, swallowing the trees, the trail, and everything ahead of me. The smell came next, a metallic tang, sharp and unnatural, clinging to the back of my throat. Blood? No, it couldn't be. But whatever it wasn't something that belonged here. I pushed forward, each step more hesitant than the last, until the path curved sharply and I saw it. Another carving, etched into a tree just beyond the first. But this one wasn't just a date, it was a message. Keep going. The words sent a chill down my spine. They were clear, deliberate, and impossible. Who had written them? And how could they have known I'd be here in this exact spot at this exact moment? The fog thickened, the air pressing down on me like a weight. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. This wasn't just history I was uncovering. It was alive, unfolding in real time, and it was pulling me deeper into its web. I glanced back at the carving one last time. The words felt less like encouragement and more like a command. And as much as I wanted to turn around, to leave this trail behind, I couldn't. The diary had brought me here, and whatever waited ahead wasn't just a part of the past. It was waiting for me, and I couldn't stop. What if the Donner Party's tragedy wasn't a desperate fight for survival, but the opening move in a sinister plan still shaping our world today? The question churned in my mind as I stood at the threshold of the cave, staring into its gaping darkness. This wasn't just a place. It was a tomb for truths too dangerous to be spoken, a vault holding the secrets of lives erased from history. The chill emanating from within wasn't just cold. It carried a weight, a pressure that seemed to reach inside me, daring me to step forward. I had no choice. Whatever answers lay hidden inside, they had been waiting far too long. The light of my lantern danced on the wet stone walls, illuminating symbols etched deep into the surface. These weren't crude carvings. They were deliberate, intricate, and alive with purpose. The patterns repeated, intertwining like veins, feeding into something deeper within. Each step I took felt heavier, as though the cave itself resisted my presence. Then I saw it. Half buried under a mound of jagged rocks was another journal, its leather cover dark and warped with age. It looked almost alive, its edges slick with moisture. My heart pounded as I lifted it, the weight of it heavier than it should have been, as though it carried not just history but intention. I opened it, and the pages stared back at me with chaotic precision. Symbols filled the margins, sprawling into the text, as though the writer had been desperate to capture something they couldn't fully understand. Some pages held coordinates, others frantic sketches of shapes that defied logic, shapes that seemed to move the longer I stared at them. And then, scrawled between the chaos, I found names. Names that didn't belong to the Donner Party. Names of settlers who had been here before them, whose existence had been wiped clean from history. These weren't victims of bad luck or poor planning. They were pawns in a game I couldn't yet understand. And always, among the chaos, one word repeated: the benefactor. Who or what was it? A person? An idea? A force? The pieces didn't fit together, but the presence of this name felt overwhelming, suffocating, as though it carried the weight of everything that had gone wrong on this cursed trail. As I flipped deeper into the journal, the tone shifted. The writing became frenzied, desperate, like the author was racing against time, or something far worse. One page contained a list, supplies, dates, and names, but with chilling variations from the records I'd seen before. The supplies weren't meant to sustain, they were meant to fail. Sabotage, manipulation. And then I found the final page. The ink here was darker, thicker, but as I traced the lines, a sick realization hit me. This wasn't ink, it was blood. The words carved into the page were jagged, trembling, written by someone who knew it would be their last act. And those words weren't a warning. They weren't a plea. They were a name. My name. The lantern flickered, the light dimming as the air around me grew heavier, crushing, suffocating. The walls of the cave seemed to close in, the symbols on their surface pulsing with an eerie glow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This wasn't just history. This wasn't just the past. It was alive. It was here. And it had been waiting for me all along. Whatever the Donner Party's tragedy had started wasn't over. It was still unfolding, still shaping the world, and somehow, what if history's darkest tragedies weren't random misfortunes, but pieces of a repeating cycle, calculated and unstoppable, still shaping our lives today? The realization hit me like a blow. The patterns weren't coincidences. They weren't isolated events scattered through time. They were deliberate, interconnected, and worse, they were active. It wasn't just the past I was unraveling, it was the present. The celestial charts were my first clue. At first they seemed abstract, strange constellations scrawled in the margins of the second journal, their lines tangled and chaotic. But as I laid them over documented dates of disasters, famines, plagues, disappearances, even wars, the alignments became disturbingly clear. These events didn't happen at random. They followed a rhythm, a schedule dictated by the movements of the stars. It wasn't enough to see the patterns in the sky. I started digging into survivor accounts from other historical tragedies, ones I'd assumed were unconnected. Shipwrecks, entire towns lost to mysterious fires, unexplained massacres. They all carried echoes of the same symbols, the jagged circles, the intersecting lines. Words scrawled in panic and fear. Trust no one. Each discovery felt like the tightening of a noose. The deeper I went, the more I realized the cycle wasn't just orchestrated, it was designed to repeat. The timeline stretched back farther than I'd imagined, with each generation playing its part, unknowingly locked into a web of manipulation. The events weren't just tragedies, they were moves in a larger game. And then I found the blueprints. In the back of the second journal, the scrawls became frantic, the lines sharper, and the symbols more pronounced. The words alongside them weren't warnings, they were instructions. Names and dates intertwined with celestial alignments, all pointing towards something. It wasn't random, it was a blueprint for control. But the worst part? It wasn't finished. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like these patterns were counting down to something inevitable. Each line, each symbol, pointed to a conclusion. One I couldn't see yet, but one I was certain I was a part of. That's when I saw the name. Hidden among the chaos, buried in the details, as if it had been waiting for me to find it. My name. The weight of it was suffocating. I wasn't just tracing these patterns, I was entangled in them. My life, my family, my very existence had been pulled into this cycle long before I was even born, and now it was closing in. The final realization was the hardest to face. The next piece of the puzzle wasn't buried in history. It wasn't hidden in journals or etched into forgotten caves. It was happening right now. This wasn't just a story of the past. The cycle wasn't over. It was alive, unraveling before my eyes, and somehow I was at the center of it. The symbols were leading to something I couldn't yet comprehend, but that I knew was coming fast. And I did. The past wasn't just haunting us, it was closing in, pulling us toward its dark legacy. Every step I took, every clue I uncovered seemed to confirm it. What I thought was history, buried and forgotten, wasn't just alive. It was hunting me, dragging me deeper into a cycle that refused to let go. The disappearances along the Donner Trail weren't just a coincidence. They followed a pattern. Locations, dates, circumstances. They mirrored the tragedies of the past with chilling precision. I began looking into the lives of those who had vanished. At first, I thought it was some twisted coincidence. But then the connections began to form. These weren't random people. They were descendants, families tied to the original settlers, those whose stories had been erased, their names scrubbed from the records. And as I traced them back, one name kept surfacing in the most unexpected places. The benefactor. This shadowy figure had lingered at the edges of my research, always just out of reach. But now, it was no longer just a name. The benefactors' influence had stretched into the present day, their presence felt in the places they'd touched and the people they'd manipulated. Financial records, corporate holdings, leaked documents. It all pointed to a network that had thrived in the shadows for generations. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about control. And it was still happening, unfolding right before my eyes. This wasn't just a story, it was a warning. I dug deeper into the descendants of the Donner Party, trying to understand who they were, what they knew, and what they were hiding. Their lives were locked down, their pasts carefully erased. But one of them responded. Just one. They didn't send a message or an explanation. They sent a single image, a map with a set of coordinates. I wasn't prepared for what I found. The coordinates led to the Donner Trail. But they weren't pointing to a site of historical significance. They marked something new, something untouched, hidden away from the world. It was as though this place had been waiting for someone to find it. The dates, the symbols. They weren't just pointing to the past anymore. They were pointing to the future. The coordinates weren't just a marker, they were a countdown, leading to a specific moment in time. A moment that was fast approaching. The weight of the discovery was crushing. This wasn't a puzzle I could solve. It wasn't a mystery to unravel. It was a trap, and I had walked straight into it. The past was no longer a shadow. It was alive, surging toward the present, clawing its way into the now. The question wasn't whether the cycle would end. It was how much it would take before it began again. And I had no idea. What if the tragedy of the Donner Party was just the opening act of a relentless nightmare, one that had been waiting for us all along? As the thoughts settled in my mind, the pieces I'd been uncovering began to shift into focus. The events I had thought were isolated, tragic coincidences weren't coincidences at all. They were fragments of a pattern, deliberate, calculated, and infinitely dark. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't about history. It was a warning. And the cycle wasn't over. It had only just begun. I had thought the journal was the end of my search, but I was wrong. It wasn't just a relic. It was a blueprint, a map leading straight into the heart of something far bigger than I could have imagined. The benefactor, whose name had haunted the edges of my research, wasn't just a figure of the past. Their influence had endured, stretching like a shadow through generations. My family wasn't an innocent bystander to these events. They were tied by blood to the roots of this design, players in a game that spanned centuries. The symbols, the dates, the cryptic notes, they weren't just warnings, they were instructions, clues left behind not just to understand what had happened, but to prepare for what was coming next. Because whatever had begun in those snowbound mountains wasn't finished. It was alive, waiting, and drawing closer with every passing moment. It wasn't until I found the letter that I truly understood. Hidden in the back of the journal, tucked between the warped pages, was a note written in frantic, jagged handwriting. These weren't the words of someone recording the past. They were a plea, a desperate warning from someone who had glimpsed what lay ahead. The letter wasn't about history. It wasn't about understanding what had already happened. It was about me. The final words were etched in blood, trembling with urgency. Prepare yourself. The next chapter has already begun. The journal slipped from my hands, the echo of those words reverberating through my mind. This wasn't just a story from the past. It was the present unfolding around me. The cycle wasn't about uncovering what had been. It was about surviving what was still to come. And the most terrifying question of all wasn't whether I could stop it. It was whether I was destined to be part of it. What would you do if you uncovered the future and realized there was no escaping it? That question consumed me, heavier than any truth I'd uncovered before. I had stumbled into something ancient, something bound to the past but alive in the present, its tendrils reaching into the future. It wasn't just history I was unraveling. It was a force, unstoppable and relentless, already set in motion. And the most terrifying realization of all, I wasn't just observing this cycle. I was part of it. The weight of generations rested on my shoulders. My family, my bloodline, had been tied to this dark design for centuries. Each clue, each chilling discovery had led me here, to the center of a pattern I couldn't escape. I had no control. The cycle wasn't waiting for me to catch up. It was already in motion, pulling me along with it. The benefactor, whose shadow had loomed over everything, wasn't just a relic of the past. Their influence was woven into the very fabric of modern life. The tragedy of the Donner Party wasn't an isolated event. It was a single chapter in a much larger, darker story, a story that was still being written. As I stood at this crossroads, I realized the choices before me weren't just personal. They would ripple outward, deciding the fates of countless others trapped in this web. If I revealed the truth, the world might not believe me, or worse, they might. If I stayed silent, the cycle would continue, unchecked, swallowing more lives. But the most chilling truth of all was this. The warning wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. This wasn't about the past or the present anymore. It was about the future, a future already bound by this cycle, refusing to die. The world wasn't just threatened, it was teetering on the edge, pulled toward the same darkness that had consumed so many before us. I thought I had been searching for answers, for some way to stop what was coming. But the real question wasn't how to fight it. It was whether it could be fought at all. As the gravity of the situation bore down on me, I asked myself, what would you do if you knew what was coming and had no power to change it? Would you rise to fight, knowing the odds were insurmountable? Or would you, like so many before you, become just another name in a story too powerful to alter? The clock was ticking. The cycle was inevitable. The next chapter wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. And by the time we realized it, it might already be too late.
Hey, before you go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our amazing community and stay connected with fresh content every single day. It's free, it's easy, and it guarantees you'll never miss out on the stories, insights, and adventures we share. So go ahead, click subscribe, and let's make every day unforgettable together.